I am so glad that you tuned in today and that you are going to listen to this episode because there is a crazy statistic that I learned. And that is that did you know that 80% of women suffer from some kind of hormonal imbalance? 80%! That is massive. And most women don't even realize it. For years, personally, I struggled with my hormones being all out of whack. And as a result, I was tired, exhausted, lethargic, disconnected, cold all the time. My hair started thinning out. I lost my period. My quality of life was absolutely terrible. And not once did I even make the link that it could be related to my hormones. And this is a conversation that I really wish that I had had years ago. So I have no doubt that you are going to get so much value from today's episode. We are getting a masterclass on hormone health and more specifically, how diet culture wrecked our hormones and how to fix it. We are joined by the incredible Kaely McDeviit. Welcome to the Live Unrestricted podcast, a show where you'll learn how to heal your relationship with food and your body so that you can focus your time and energy on more important things like your personal growth. I'm your host, Sabrina Magna, food freedom coach, and my mission is to help make your life happier and healthier without stress, overwhelm, or guilt about food. If you love the show, please do go out and share it. And if you're looking for support with your relationship with food, details about my programs are in the show notes. Thanks for spending time with me today. Now let's jump in. I am so excited because today we're joined by Kaely McDeviit, and she's a registered dietitian specializing in nutrition for women's health. She and her team help their clients reclaim their energy, optimize fertility, and overcome hormone symptoms through personalized nutrition. And Kaely has experienced her own pitfalls of conventional approaches to women's health firsthand. So that's why she's so passionate about empowering women to build health from a place of connection to self, connection to nature, connection to community. So in this episode and in this conversation, we are going to talk about the foundations of hormone health and metabolism, what it means to eat in a way that supports happy hormones, the signs and symptoms of hormonal imbalance and deficiency for you to be able to diagnose if this might be something that you are suffering with, some of the mistakes that cause our body to go into these states of survival and chronic stress and how it affects the quality of your life, and just so much more. I learned so much in this conversation, and that's why I know that you will too. So without further ado, I'm going to play that interview with the incredible Kaely McDeviit. Well, thank you so much, Kaely, for being here. I am so excited to talk about this topic. This is something that so many women who have been stuck in diet culture and yo-yo dieting and under-eating are probably experiencing right now, and they might not even know about it. And that is how diet culture can affect our hormones, our metabolism. So I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you. And a new mother. So I'm so thankful and grateful that you took time out of your busy day to be here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here too.
Yeah. So as most people, I'm sure that you have your own story as to why you got into this work. So can you tell my listeners a little bit about kind of what made you so passionate about hormone health and what brought you to the work that you do today?
Yeah, absolutely. I was drawn to the field of nutrition and dietetics because I was an athlete and I thought I would work in sports nutrition. It's what I wanted to do. And I was an athlete growing up, and then I had a brief stint as a marathon runner, which just feels crazy to even say now because I just can't relate to that season of my life. But anywho, I had no intention of being in the women's health space. But as luck would have it, while I was in school getting my RD credentials, I was dealing with all kinds of hormone health symptoms. So I was put on birth control really young, like pretty much as soon as I started having my period, because they were so miserable and symptomatic. And I was like, amazing, this looks like a solution for this. And unfortunately, that started me down years of really not feeling like myself anymore. I had a whole bunch of anxiety and fatigue and just like sluggish thyroid and metabolism type symptoms, and just really didn't feel like myself most of the month. And I was seeing different providers and they were all like, no, that can't be the reason. Like, we could offer an anti-anxiety or an antidepressant medication. And it was just this path I really didn't want to go down. And at the same time, I'm learning all of this nutrition stuff in my schooling and I'm applying it beautifully, like perfectly. And I'm feeling worse and worse as the years go on. So I finished my schooling and it was like 7 total years of undergrad, grad, and an internship in this space. And I finished it feeling the worst I had health-wise and really not understanding the menstrual cycle or what our hormones do or how those are involved in how we feel, which I always like to mention because that was higher education in a health space and I did not have an understanding of that. And so I ended up, working different jobs, not in the women's health space, but spending a lot of my free time learning about the stuff that I hadn't learned in school, which is, what are our sex hormones? How do those influence our metabolism and our mood and our energy? How does birth control play into that conversation? And how might we change things like food and nutrition to feel better in that department? And I ended up having to essentially do like a 180 from the things that I was being taught and applying meticulously to find a way of eating and living that made me feel like me again. And I started to share it as a blog on the internet like 10 years ago and eventually realized how many women were looking for that kind of information too. So pivoted from, sports nutrition to women's health and have been in private practice since and love to do this work.
Wow. That's okay. I have so many follow-up questions. So when you were going through all of that and you were experiencing all of those symptoms, did you know, is this my hormones? Did you know what was the cause of that?
I had suspicions that it was related to being on birth control and that influence on our hormones just because of the timeline of when I started to feel this way. But I was getting told that couldn't be it anytime I was seeing a doctor. So I had suspicions, but I wasn't quite sure.
And how many years would you say that you struggled with these symptoms?
A good 5 to 10 years. So I was on birth control a total of 10 years. I don't think I realized that I wasn't feeling quite right until several years later. And then I spent that time just changing different types of birth control, doing everything I could from a nutritional standpoint. And, it was big on the calorie counting, my plate guide, that type of recommendation back then, lower fat style eating. And I was doing all of that, trying to feel better. And as I'm sure we'll talk about today, it was part of what made me feel worse.
Yeah. And what actually got you interested in wanting to become a registered dietitian in the first place?
Yeah. So I, like I mentioned, grew up an athlete and I was always interested in the fact that if I ate a specific, it was always a smoothie for me before volleyball games, I would feel and perform really well. And I chalked it up to a superstitious thing at the time. I was like, oh, this is my pregame smoothie that I always have. But then I realized that there was science to that. I was getting the right amount of carbs and proteins ahead of an athletic event. And I just, science was always the space that I was most interested in. I was very fascinated by health and the human body, and nutrition was kind of a natural fit there.
Okay. And did you ever fall victim to diet culture mistakes? You had mentioned counting your calories. How did that look for you in your life?
Yes, for sure. And I should add that to the appeal of going to the dietetics route was as somebody that was a very type A perfectionist with food and exercise. I was like, oh, amazing. I'm going to learn exactly how I need to be eating in this career path. And I'm going to do it so perfect. No one's ever seen it done this perfect before. So when I was in undergrad, which is when I decided to go this path, I was doing tons and tons of cardio to burn calories because that's what I thought I needed. And I was eating essentially as little as I could and still feel good. It was very calorie counting. I think that's around when MyFitnessPal came onto the market. So we could track calories on an app. And I was just of the mindset that the thinnest I could be was the healthiest I could be. And I was using food and exercise to accomplish that.
Even when you were talking, I was like, I am interested to know if that was part of it because I was also a high level athlete, also type A perfectionist.
Yeah.
And I know that especially in the dietetics field, there's a lot of disordered eating.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people get into it with not maybe the healthiest intentions. And so I was curious to know if there was any kind of link there.
Yeah.
And I guess now we can start talking about when it comes to properly nourishing your body. And especially when we think about the 2000s where it was the Special K diet and eating as low carb, low fat as possible. Why are so many women so confused about how to properly nourish their bodies?
Yeah, it's a huge a huge question. And I think there are a lot of factors for that. But if you just think about like the millennial generation of women alone, every generation had their own stuff going on. If you think about the like bodies that were celebrated as we were growing up was just like as skinny as possible. The diet recommendations were, we went through a phase of like very low calorie, low fat, very afraid of fat. I remember like everything was fat free or low fat when I was a kid. And then we swung the pendulum to carb fearing, very low carb and keto. And then there's been like a bunch of intermittent fasting and all kinds of spin-offs on these things throughout our lifetime. And I think we've gotten so accustomed to the fact that we have to follow some kind of a rule or program in order to eat healthy. We're used to somebody else telling us what to do. And I think all of that marketing that we just kind of marinated in throughout our upbringing taught us that we can't be the one that dictates how we eat. And we have to look to rules outside of ourselves. And we have to try to do whatever we can to appeal to that like beauty standard that we're seeing on tabloids as we check out at the grocery store, what we see on TV. And we created a generation of women that are completely disconnected from their own autonomy, their own hunger and fullness cues, what it means to look and feel healthy. And I just think we missed an opportunity to develop that skill set because we were looking outside ourselves for it. And I'm somebody that, studied all of this in school. This was the career path I went down, and I was in that same boat too. So there's no shame to anybody that resonates with it. I just think it's a product of the upbringing.
Yeah. And that was actually going to be my follow-up question. Do you see a lot of registered dietitians who did go through the schooling and are still promoting some of those tactics?
I think things have changed quite a bit in the field, and I might be biased because I'm in a bit of a bubble of people doing similar things. So that's usually what I'm seeing. And I think there's so many dietitians doing great work, kind of breaking away from that old school mentality of like meal plans and calorie tracking. But I'm sure that there's still some of that going on. And an unfortunate thing is I feel like a good percentage of the nutrition recommendations that come through the academy are just so outdated still. And it's so slow for things to be studied and then implemented in practice. I think the stat on that is like 17 years from something being studied to actually changing a standard of care.
Wow.
So it just feels like we've got really outdated information still coming through that educational track.
Yeah. Okay. So for anyone who's maybe not really familiar with hormone health and how it works and how it impacts your metabolism and your mood and your energy, can you give us like a little crash course on the basics and the foundations?
Yes, I would love to. So your hormones are really influencing like how we feel, function, and interact with the world around us. So you can think of them as little chemical messengers, and they're influencing everything from the health and speed of our metabolism. So how well are we turning food into energy, to our fertility, of course, to our menstrual cycles, to our mood, to the way that we engage with those that we're in relationship with, to the speed at which our brain functions. I don't know if you resonate with like brain foggy days where we're just like not making connections quickly. A lot of that can be hormonal. Our digestion is impacted by it. And then even externally, the health of our hair, skin, and nails. So, our hormones influence every facet of life. And if they are out of whack, we tend to not feel like ourselves, or we have a lot of symptoms. And those symptoms can, of course, be very much tied to menstrual cycle and fertility. That's usually where it first catches our eye, but it bleeds into everything else too, from sluggish metabolism to, hair, skin, nail changes, and again, even just mood swings.
Yeah. Oh my God. When you were telling me all of that, it just brought me back to my years in university when everything I was doing was to be as small as possible, but all in the name of quote unquote health. Yeah. And it was, spending hours at the gym and eating 1,200 calories, only having X amount of calories in a meal. And I remember just my hair was thinning out. I was tired all the time. I was cold all the time. Yes. Couldn't concentrate, couldn't feel connected or like vulnerable with people, with friends. I definitely did not even want to date, like had no sex drive. And at no point during those years did I stop and think, is this actually what health looks like? Right? We get that so confused. And I think that people get so like tunnel vision on this idea of what it means to be healthy. And more importantly, like what it looks to be healthy, that we end up doing a lot of damage on our body without even realizing it.
I think you're so right. And that visual you just gave of how you were feeling at that time, I really resonate with that too. That's absolutely how I was feeling as well. And that's like a complete loss of that spark for life. Like there's no vibrance in that. It's no way to go through this existence resistance. And it was, at least in my case, and it sounds like yours too, for the pursuit of what we thought it looked like to be healthy and at the cost of what it felt like to be healthy.
I remember when I went to Italy, which was a trip that really changed my perspective on what it means to have a healthy relationship with food. And I remember it was my dream country. I had always wanted to go there. And I was looking at all of these amazing views and my friends were in awe. And I remember just thinking I don't feel anything. And it was so heartbreaking because I was I thought that I would feel differently. I would feel this type of connection. And you just end up feeling numb. And you said, you lose the spark for life and this excitement for things that should bring you joy.
Yeah. I'm really glad that you took the conversation there because it's so much more about that than anything else with health. It's how are we experiencing and enjoying this life that we're gifted? And that's just no way to move through it. I mean, it's we completely lack color in our lives when we're living that way.
Yeah. What's the difference between hormonal imbalance and hormonal deficiency?
Yeah. So our hormones are like everything else in the body, a Goldilocks situation. We want just right amounts and we want just right amounts in relation to one another. So a deficiency would be a very low level of a hormone that impacted the way that we feel and function. And then an imbalance means that when we look at multiple hormones, we're seeing ratios between them at a suboptimal value. And what's most common for an imbalance is we have too much estrogen and not enough progesterone as women. And that's to blame for most of those cycle symptoms. So if you're somebody that has a lot of heavy, painful periods, really significant PMS, maybe a week or two out of the month, we're just not even feeling like ourselves, a lot of mood swings, sleep issues, bloating, all that fun stuff. It's usually an estrogen progesterone imbalance. We can have other imbalances too. That's just the one that is seen most commonly and probably lands the most with your audience in terms of symptoms.
Okay. And how does that happen? How do you get to a point where you have too much estrogen and not enough progesterone?
Yeah. So I want to back up just one step further to what is the connection between our hormones and the way that we are eating and moving. Because we talked about the fact that we did everything we could to be this vision of health. And then we ended up feeling the way we feel when our hormones are out of whack. And in women, safety is the number one thing that our body is looking for biologically. And whether or not you want to have kids right now, in the future, or ever, the menstrual cycle is designed around that procreation. So we need a body that feels safe in order to ovulate, and it has abundant energy to support another life if you decide to do that. So if through things like not eating enough or not eating the right foods or exercising way too much or just not getting good rest, we create that signal of lack of safety in the body or lack of energy, then we start to pull resources away from hormone production. And the first step on that is something like an imbalance. We'll talk about that. And then long term, that looks more like a deficiency. It's at first things are a little wonky. And then if we just still ignore the signs that our body needs more energy, more safety, then we pull all resources away from that because your life doesn't depend on healthy hormones. You can live and exist without them. You just don't live fully. So in the name of survival, your body will save resources for other more pressing things. Now, for that specific imbalance, higher estrogen, lower progesterone that we see in most clients, again, most women that are having what they're deeming to be hormone symptoms typically present with that picture. That can be a combination of lifestyle things. So I mentioned that theme of safety is something that we harp on big time with our clients. And if we interact on social media, you'll see that this is mentioned in almost every post. And if we lack safety, that means we lack ovulation, or we ovulate, but not to our fullest extent. And if we don't ovulate well, we don't make any progesterone. Or if we ovulate just weekly, we make just a little bit of progesterone. And progesterone balances the effects of estrogen. So where estrogen can build up tissue, like build up a thicker uterine lining and cause a heavier, more painful period, progesterone keeps that in check. Progesterone is anti-anxiety. It is sleep promoting. It is just like nature's calm, soothing hormone. And it speeds our metabolism up and helps the health of our thyroid. So we want that progesterone around. But if we lack safety or lack energy, we lack progesterone. If we're really high stress, we lack progesterone. And estrogen doesn't have that same immediate response to those things. So while progesterone goes down, estrogen stays up and just remains unchecked. There's no checks and balances on it. And that's why looking at hormones in relation to one another is really important, because a woman that is presenting with those high estrogen symptoms might actually have totally normal levels of estrogen. But the problem in her case is that there's no progesterone to counter it. If you've got normal progesterone but sky high estrogen, you can have the same constellation of symptoms, but a very different reason or a very different root cause.
I love that you brought up that concept of safety, because this is something that I also talk about so much when it comes to your nervous system and being regulated and being in a sense of rest and digest. And most people, I mean, I only in the past few years started learning about how to tap into when I'm going into this state of survival and fight or flight. And I've gone way too many burnouts now that now I'm able to really recognize those really subtle signs of, okay, today you need to take it easy. You need to slow things down. You need to be okay with just sitting and doing nothing and really being just with yourself, because oftentimes we're always on the go. We're always thinking about other people's needs. And I would be curious to know, what are some things that could send our body into this state of lack of safety?
Yeah. And I resonate with all of that too. I think probably anybody listening to has dealt with burnout from time to time. So a couple of the big ones would be, chronic undereating, and that can be accidental too. And I think that's important. Intentional, we know that that's being done. Accidental is life is so busy that we're just forgetting to eat before we leave in the morning. Or maybe we've got a whole bunch of kiddos that we're feeding and really forget to make sure that we've got adult size meal for ourselves. Or maybe it's just never been on our radar and we haven't learned what an adult female actually needs in order to eat and sustain herself. I always find that that's a pretty eye-opening thing for clients, is to realize the 1,200 calorie recommendations that we're not really sure where they came from, but we grew up with are like the amount that a toddler needs, not an adult. Not getting enough sleep can be another big one here too, or just poor quality sleep. That is such important, like reset and restoration of our brain at night. Too much exercise or not having enough recovery from it. And that could be that the exercise itself is too intense, or maybe the volume of exercise is too high for your current state of nutrition or recovery. Of course, life stressors can be part of this too. So work, relationship, financial stressors, even just perceived stress in our brain can create that lack of safety. Lack of time in nature is a really big one that I think gets missed. I think modern humans essentially live in captivity. Like, we're under fluorescent lights, we're in front of blue light screens, whether it's our phone, our computer, or our TV, and we're never outside getting sunlight or feeling our feet on the ground. That's a stressor. Not having enough community or play, like people that we're engaging with, laughter and joy, and doing things just for fun, not because it's accomplishing something. And I always like to mention that one too. And it's something that we'll assign to our clients. And they're like, I'm here for really tactical nutrition stuff. And it's like, no, just go do something fun. Like, play.
Yes. Oh my God. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I know that when I started, I'm a very visual person, just thinking about where humans come from, like where we go back like millions and millions of years. And there's us in the jungle being chased by lions and really everything. If you look at animals who are foraging and always looking for food, and everything is really about survival. And humans have evolved to have a cognitive ability to think and evolve and, be ambitious and have plans and organize. But at the root of it, we can't do that if we're in this constant state of survival. So if you imagine that your body has needs, it has needs for fuel in food, it has needs for sleep and for rest and for like that mental peace, like you mentioned, the life stressors, then you can see how it's really hard to get to a point where you are able to think clearly. You are able to think long term about the life that you want to create and to be proactive instead of reactive when you're constantly your body is just trying to survive.
Totally. And it's really hard to even have conversations about things that it can improve your health when you're in that survival state. I always think of it like when you're dealing with, maybe it's a lot of health symptoms or you're just so burnt out and our body is just surviving, not thriving. It's like we can only see a foot in front of us. It's like, that's all we have capacity for. And that's smart because your body's like, we don't want to waste energy on anything down the road. We just got to get through, this minute. It's really difficult to discuss bigger picture things. Like, how do you want to feel? How do you want to move through life? What is that vision for yourself? What would it look like to enjoy things more? And I know that if somebody asked me those questions when I was in the peak of not feeling well and peak of burnt out, I'd be like, who cares? I can't even think about that right now.
Yeah.
So again, I just want to share that if anyone's feeling like they're in the thick of it and they're like, yeah, this sounds great, but I can't relate to those questions. There's a certain degree of nourishment that has to come in first before you can even entertain that stuff. So just have some grace with yourself. It takes time to get out of that like really chronic fight or flight state. state that most humans are running around in these days, but it certainly can be done.
Yeah. Whenever I'm talking to a client and they tell me like, I could write a book on nutrition. I know what I should be doing. I know what are the recommendations. I know all of it logically. I can't do it. I literally can't follow through with it. And if any of you listeners are feeling that way too, I personally think that the first place you want to look at is, am I feeling safe? Am I feeling regulated? Because if you are in that state of survival, and I know, like you said, like sometimes life just gets in the way. You have kids, you have obligations, you have all of these things. It really starts with regulating your body so that it feels safe to think about the long term, so that it's not constantly looking for the threats and what like the next shoe to drop. That's something I hear all the time is like, I never feel like I can rest because I'm always feeling like the next shoe's about to drop.
Yeah. Gosh, and that state is such a common thing for, I'd say, modern women or modern humans. And it is a complete opposite of the state that supports healthy, happy hormones. I mean, we can't thrive in that state. We were never meant to be bathed in stress hormones all the time. It was always supposed to be a short-term thing to get us out of a stressful situation. But that's like the modern human just stays there. We don't get into that rest and digest very often unless we're intentional about it.
Yes. Okay. So now let's say that someone's listening right now and they can identify with some of those signs of being in survival. Maybe they are under eating either intentionally or unintentionally, not getting enough sleep, feeling constant stress. And it is like they feel like they maybe know what they should be doing, but they struggle to even get started. When you're working with a client and they come to you and you're just getting started, like how do you even start taking steps to eat in a way that supports happy hormones so that you can feel your best and experience life fully?
Yeah, it's tricky because we mentioned it's tough to make those first couple changes when we're feeling that way. And knowing that and giving yourself grace is a big part of it too, because we don't want the work on our health to become another stressor in our life as well. It's easy to do that. But what we like to do is start with the morning. So I think everything else follows what we do right in the first hour of the day. And it's an easy starting point. You know, everything from the rest of the day of blood sugar to even the sleep on the night ahead is impacted by what happens in the morning. So we'll start with that. And depending on the individual, there might be some really, really basic things. Like step one is we don't want to hit snooze on the alarm clock. We want to get up promptly when we're supposed to wake up in the morning because we want to take advantage of cortisol doing helpful things for us first thing in the day. Cortisol gets a bad rap because it's a stress hormone that's usually too high, but we need it to actually get us out of bed in the morning to get our immune system instruction for the day to keep inflammation down. And when we snooze our alarm, we're never letting that rise of cortisol happen that's supposed to get us out of bed in the morning. And it can be why we feel sluggish throughout the rest of the day and rely on caffeine. So step one would be, what is our wake time? Can we stick with that wake time every single day? And can we stop snoozing the alarm and like get right up? And then from there, we want to ideally see some sunlight. And I know we're getting into the winter soon here, and this becomes trickier. And that is where those full spectrum light boxes can be really helpful. But getting some sunlight in your eyes, like no contacts, no glasses, is a really great way to entrain that circadian rhythm. So getting appropriate hormone signals throughout that 24-hour body clock. And then we also like to add minerals first thing in the morning. And then we'll talk about breakfast. And that's kind of our four main things is like wake time, sunlight, minerals, and breakfast. Minerals are like the little spark plugs for our cells. They run the enzymes in our cells, and then those enzymes control our hormones. And something that gets depleted rapidly during stress is mineral status. And it can be why we feel like we have no gas in the tank and why we might linger with symptoms even when we start working on that stress. And most people aren't getting enough of them because our soil is so depleted today versus even, 50 or 100 years ago. So we can do this really easily with like a glass of water with a squeeze of lemon and a pinch of salt. That's like our low cost way to get some minerals there. There are all kinds of powders and beverages and things that are mineral rich now, which is fun. You can get creative with this if you want, but just getting some of that like mineral rich salt in the morning makes a big difference for the health of our adrenals, the way we buffer stress, and even our digestive juices flowing. So a way to habit stack with that would be, alarm goes off, we're immediately up, we grab our water, we add the pinch of salt and lemon, and then we step outside and we're like looking at the sun while we sip that. Doesn't have to be long. I'm talking like a couple minutes would be great. If we can't get outside, even in front of a window, just some sunlight. And then breakfast would be the next piece of that conversation. And what we find in clients, and maybe you felt yourself, is that that when we are burnt out or underfueled, we often aren't hungry in the morning because we've gotten so used to ignoring hunger cues that we've just downregulated the metabolism. And so it's going to take a little time to get that back. And that's one of the cool things you can pay attention to in real time is, am I waking up hungry? And if I am, that's a good sign that I've increased safety, I've increased my metabolism. But we want to get a protein-rich breakfast within that first hour of the day. That's going to establish a safety signal, support those adrenals, support blood sugar stability, and get that metabolic fire burning that will hopefully continue throughout the rest of the day. If we miss that first hour and we skip breakfast and we're not eating until maybe around lunchtime, we're really just playing catch up the rest of the day. It's really tough to get back on top of it. And that's why we like to start here. I don't even care what's happening the rest of the day. If we can just nail this morning, things will fall into place.
Yes. Oh my God, that's so helpful. And I know that I'm definitely one who has struggled with pressing the snooze button in the morning. And I know that what has helped me a lot, and I share this with my clients, like for someone who doesn't do this already, it can feel overwhelming, right? Like you hear these people's morning routines and maybe you're someone who hits snooze until 5 minutes before you have to leave for work. And then you grab coffee as your breakfast and then you're just like so frazzled in the morning. So it can feel really hard to hear all of that. And you're like, how am I ever going to implement all of that?
Yeah.
So I would say that what's really helpful is number one, making sure that you give yourself the time. Like, yes, sometimes it means waking up 10 minutes earlier and then just giving yourself the time and planning it out ahead of time. What I'll often do, especially when it comes to snoozing the alarm, is before I go to bed the night before, I will visualize my morning and I will visualize my alarm going off and me looking at the dark window and feeling really comfy in my bed and having those thoughts of, oh, I'll just press snooze for another 10 minutes and it's going to feel so good. And all of the kind of excuses that we make in the morning. And then I'll practice what I'm going to do instead and how I'm going to get myself motivated to get up and what's going to be like the thing that's going to get me excited. And for me, it's doing my meditation and reading my book and really like, I love the feeling of getting up on time and having a nice, long, slow morning before I start my day off. So I think that can be really helpful is if you leave it to the morning of when you are so used to your routine and your habits and something that is automatic and autopilot for you, chances are you will just fall back into what you know and what's familiar. So how can you set yourself up ahead of time?
Yeah, I like that a lot. And even just knowing like this is going to suck for potentially the first week of trying to do this. Like it takes time to change some things in the body and just knowing like, hey, I can do hard things. All I have on my to-do list for the next 5 to 7 days is get up at a consistent time every day. And then once that's handled and we've got that under our belt, we can move on to the next item on that to-do list for the morning. This doesn't all have to be done in one day, but I think humans work really well when we build that momentum. And every day that you are getting up and not snoozing, you are, doing what you said you were going to do, right? Like you've maintained integrity with yourself and this goal that you've laid out. And like that is so motivating. We've got like a win on the board already and all we did was open our eyes. So just give yourself some space to move through that. If you mess up one day, it's not a big deal. We'll try again the next morning, but that's how we can start to snowball these habits. And I like to just start with that morning.
Yeah. And so often we love instant gratification. It's like human behavior. We love instant gratification. And this is one of those things where you might not notice the benefits for weeks, months. And so when it comes to these things where I know that you don't really necessarily get that instant gratification, I always like to ask myself and my clients, how can you create instant gratification for yourself in those moments where, like you said, you tap yourself on the back and you're like, oh, wow, I actually kept my word and I followed through on my intentions. Or I go for a morning walk to get outside and I come home and I'm like, it feels so good. I'm so much more energized. So tapping into how good it feels to take that 10 minutes in the morning and to dedicate it to yourself, really asking yourself that question of like, how can I create instant gratification based off of this?
Yeah, I like that a lot. And depending on the person, it can be really simple too. Some people really love like a checklist or like a gold star, right? Like we did back in school for completing something. So if that's you, have a little chart. You can make it all pretty. And then you get to put like a sticker or a check or color something in every morning that's done. And for some people, that's a really motivating thing. We just like to check things off the list and then we can visually see it, stacking up. For others, that is not at all motivating and we'll have to come up with something else for you. But for those that love a good checklist, like it can be that simple for that
absolutely
little dopamine hit,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Kaely, you are such a joy. And I even learned so much today. So I really appreciate you. Anyone, I'm sure that there's going to be listeners who are going to want to connect with you, are going to want to follow you. So where can they find you?
Sure. Yeah. So you can find me on Instagram. It's at Kaely RD. And my name is spelled really weird. It's KaelyRD. And that's where you'll find a lot of, free education. You'll find info about the different ways my team and I might be able to support you. My website is the same, KaelyRD.com. But if you do listen, I'd love to hear what you thought. So feel free to reach out in the DMs.
Beautiful. And I also think that you have something to share as a free resource for my listeners. So can you share that as well?
Sure. Yeah. So you'll see, I think it'll probably be under this in the show notes.
Yes, absolutely.
A link to pregnancy prep email series. So this is a 6-part free series that just walks you through the steps to help get things like cycle, hormones, and symptoms in line with the goal of potentially conceiving. And even if that's not the goal now, or even if it's way down the road, these are the exact same steps we would take to support happy hormones because those things are one and the same.
Amazing. So yes, I will leave all of that information in the show notes so that you can grab that free resource and connect with Kaely. Thank you so much again for being here. I will definitely be using some of your tips as well. And thank you to all of you listeners for listening. And we will see you next week on the next episode. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you found it valuable, I would love if you would share it with someone you know that could benefit. If you're loving the show, don't forget to subscribe over on Apple Podcasts so you don't miss a single episode. I really love hearing feedback from you, so please leave a rating and review over on Apple to help us get in the ears of more people who need it the most. Finally, come hang out with me on Instagram at Sabrina Magnan Health for more educational content and get up close and personal with me. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you on the next episode.